Hey guys, welcome to Indie Game Hustle. My name is Charles, and in this video, I've actually decided to take a look at our cameras to kind of start thinking about what's it going to look like when we're playing, and what angle are we going to have this set up at. Now, we're going to, in the next few videos, we're going to take a look at how our player and our enemies are going to die, but with that comes other things, like when the player dies, it reduces lives. It's going to reduce all types of different things. Scenes are going to change. And then on top of that, when you hit a checkpoint in the game, because it's kind of like a platformer, when you hit a checkpoint, you need to send the player back. So all of these things are going to kind of play into when our player loses life down to 0. But before we do that, I want to set up our scene. And so with this video, what I want to do is take a look at our camera. And so what I want is, I think I want to have our camera be more static in that it follows the player. And I want the camera to change position based on the area that we're in. Okay, so instead of having you have like a free flowing camera where you can rotate around the player completely, it'll be more like when you go into a certain area, maybe the camera will kind of shift to a different angle, and when you go into another area, to shift to a different angle. So I think that will work pretty well. So that's what this video is going to be about. So let's go ahead and take a look at our camera as it is. So right now, in terms of setting up the camera in your hierarchy, if you click on the camera motor, this is generally where you're going to affect all the different changes that your game or your camera is going to have. And there's all types of different camera settings. Okay, so this is what we've been using now. This is called the adventure camera. And we didn't really play with a lot of this, mainly just because it wasn't about that. But you can definitely use this. This is going to allow you to rotate around the character. You can have it auto position around the character at a certain speed, all of that stuff. And these are really good features. But what I'm going to do is change it. Now, if you click on here in the camera motor, you just click on change. You have different options here. First person, fix, follow, railway, target, tween. I haven't used target and tween or railway before, but I've used first person, fix, and follow. So what we're going to use is the follow camera. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the follow camera. The fixed and the follow is kind of similar, but the difference is fixed, meaning you have a camera pointed at a particular location and it just doesn't move. So you can trigger your camera to go from a follow camera to a fixed camera based on your triggers and conditions or whatever you have set up. So that's what we're going to take a look at. All right, so follow camera. Now, in terms of how we want this to look, what I'm going to do is go ahead and hit play. Now, I've already changed it to follow camera, but these are the presets here. So if I hit play, and so once I hit play and we have our character here, as you can see, this is the direction. Now I can't move the camera. I can't do anything. All it is this is a follow camera. It's following him at a set position. Now, what's great about this is while in play mode, we can kind of get a gist of what we want this to look like. So if I were to take on the Y, if I hover my mouse over the Y, you get these two arrows on the left and the right. If I drag left or drag right, you can see that it's going up in the Y direction, right? And it's focused on the player, and that's great. And so what if I want it to be maybe something like, we'll just go even like 4. Okay, now in terms of the X, this is going to be the offset. Now I don't necessarily want to change this. I think I want it to stay centered, so I'm just going to go with 0. But the Z, or the Z axis, is going to give us that inward and outward feel, right? So what I want to do is get something maybe like this, but I don't want it negative. So what I'll do is go ahead and go positive 4, and now we're going to be facing the camera from this way, okay? So we're going to go like positive. All right, great. So I'll do maybe like a 5. All right, great. All right, so now our character is, there we go, hit the A key. All right, so now our character is centered within our viewport here. And what I'm going to do is hit play, because remember, any changes that you make while in play mode are not going to remain. So what we need to do is take note of what changes that we wanted. So we know it was a 4 and a 5. All right, great. So I'm going to get play now again. All right, and so now what I'm going to do is take a look. So now we have something a little more reasonable. And when I hit the swing button, I'm good there. So I'm not moving the camera around, so I can focus on just attacking using the mouse button. All right, and so that looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. So next thing we probably want to think about is, so we can do now is our offset. So now, right now our character is in the center of the screen, and I don't necessarily want him right in the center of the screen. So what we can do is do an offset on the Y. So we can bring this like this, just like so. So now we have more space. We can see the world that we're going to create here. So if we have beautiful vistas and buildings and all types of plants and all types of things, we can see that at this view here, because if we would have kept it something like this, you wouldn't really see anything there. Now, there's nothing wrong with having this type of view. That works fine. And we may need to do that depending on certain areas of our level. But for a general sense, I think something like this, maybe like a 2, would be pretty good to start. So when we're attacking, so now when we're attacking, we're good to go. We're also not getting any, we're clipping for our camera. Now, if you are deciding, I'm gonna go ahead and put this to a 2, but if you are deciding to use the adventure camera, and you remember when we were going in close, the camera was clipping off. So I'm gonna click on the camera motor, and I'm gonna just change it back to adventure camera. Now, let's see here. I'm going to hit play and see if we still have that issue. Now, right now, as you can see, I'm back in my adventure camera. And if I'm just moving my mouse, I'm rotating. Now, when you go closer into an enemy, it clips off based on like line of sight. Okay. And so if you want to mess with that and turn that off, what you would do is play with the wall clip, so avoid wall clip. So you can simply change it. You can remove certain things, or you can just simply turn it off so that it doesn't do that. Now, that just really depends on what you need. I definitely would recommend using it in certain instances and having it have certain layers, and we can talk about that later in a different video. But if just for now, if you didn't want any type of clipping, as you can see, it's not doing any clipping when we're close anymore. So, and this is just for those who decide maybe they want to use the adventure camera. And I would suggest that you kind of play with all these different settings here, because they're kind of self-explanatory, right? Allow zoom, zoom speed, zoom limits. And if I were to just kind of go over here, and I'm gonna change this from mouse move to left hold. So now I have to hold the mouse down. And so now max pitch. So now we can change the max pitch. So now I can only do maybe something like this. And we have all types of other things we can play with, but I would say play with that. So, but we're going to go to, for this particular game, I think I'm going to focus on using the the follow camera. And it looks like my settings changed. So I'm just going to go back to 4, 5, and I think I had this at 2. And let's just make sure that is correct. All right, great. So let's see here. All right, great. So now we have that. And so the next thing I'm thinking about is, how do we change our camera based on where we're at? And that's going to be something that we're going to use a lot in this particular game. I've played with that function before in the past with another project that I'm working on, and I think it's actually pretty nice. So this is going to play out pretty well, because obviously the levels are not going to be this big. They're going to be much larger, I believe, and have all types of walls and all types of things. And So it's going to be important to understand how to change the camera a little bit. So let's take a quick look at how to do that. So what I want to do is create a trigger, and we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. So I'm going to go right click, I'm going to go to Game Creator, and I'm going to do a trigger. And just remember, we want to trigger something to happen, right? To happen. So what we want to do is change the trigger type, and we want to go to Object, and we want on player enter. Okay. So when the player enters into a particular trigger, we want it to do something, a particular action. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this Actions tab here. It's going to create an action for us. And I'm going to go ahead and rename it just so that we can get a sense of what it is. And I'm going to call it Change Camera. And I'll just call it Camera 1. And then, so I'm going to go to Actions. And what we want to do is move this trigger somewhere. So I'm going to move it over here because it's just a game object. I'm going to bring it up, and as you can see, it's a sphere, and we need this sphere to be larger so that when our player enters into this area, it does a thing, right? So what I'm going to do is increase this sphere to be something like that, okay? And then I'll move it over here like so. All right. And so when we walk into this area, I want the camera to change. All right. And so I'm going to go back to Actions, and let's think it through. So I'm going to click on Actions, and we need the camera to change. So there is a folder called Camera. Let's see if it has anything in here for us. So it has Change FOV, Adventure Camera Settings, Change Camera. That could work. Let's click that and see what it does. We have Main Camera Motor. So are we going to change it to the main camera motor? No, we're not going to do that. We're going to change the camera motor completely. All right. So we have the camera motor. So what we need to do now is create a new camera motor in our scene. So I'm going to just click somewhere in our hierarchy. Now, I love this little bar. So what you want to do is just head over to this bar and click on the little camera icon where it says Create Camera Motor. And it creates an additional camera motor right there. Perfect. All right. So now this camera motor is really no different from this one. The only difference is that we're going to mark this camera motor as our main camera motor. Okay. And then for this particular camera motor, when I click here, we're going to just change some of the settings. So I'm going to go here, click on Change, and we're going to change this to, let's call this we'll just do a fixed camera maybe. Let's do another follow camera and see how that works. So that's going to be a follow camera motor, and I'll just move this here. It doesn't necessarily matter where it's at, but if you want, I think we can go ahead and just put it inside the camera change that we're using to keep everything together. And then we're just going to change the settings to something else, like something completely different than what we had before. I'll do that, and then I'll do maybe something like an 8 and leave that at a 0, just to be different. All right, great. So the idea is that when the player enters the sphere, it's going to fire off this action, and it's going to change this camera motor to the camera motor that we put inside here. So we're going to click and drag this motor here. Perfect. And then we're going to do a transition time. So do we want it to slowly transition to this new camera, or do we want it to be instant? So in this case, I think a nice little transition would probably be nice. So we'll just go ahead and do 1 and see how fast that is. So it's 1 second, by the way. So, all right. So let's see if this actually works the way we intended it to. All right. So I'm going to hit play. All right. So what we're going to do is just go head over into that corner and see what happens. Did you see the change? So the change was, as soon as we came over here, the camera went a little higher, right? And it's still following our player. All right. And so I'm going to walk over here, and that's the only thing, right? So when we walk over here, it's still at that new camera setting that we changed. So what we want to do is make it return to our original camera, our base camera. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And so now I'm going to go to trigger, and I'm going to say another trigger, and I'm going to type in trigger. And this time we're going to do it on player exit, right? And so when I do exit, we want to do another action. In this case, it's action 5. And then so now we want to go to camera. We're going to change camera. And so we could just move this camera into here, since this is our base camera, this one here. But instead, we're going to select main camera motor. And the reason this should work is because we named this one, this camera motor, the main camera. So it should know that. All right, so let's check to see if our camera changes back. Now we could do a transition time. So let's do a transition time for 1 for that new action. All right, and so let's hit play and see what happens. All right, great. All right, so this is right now, we're currently in our base camera. So what I'm gonna do is move my player over here. And as you notice, the camera changes, and that's good. So if we leave the area, and so let me select the trigger, and I'm gonna turn on my gizmo so that we can see the space that we're in. All right, so we're currently here, so let's look. It's the moment that we walk outside this sphere, it should change back. All right, you see that? So every time we walk over and walk out, it's changing the camera motors. And so this will be really good for what we're doing so that we can set up our game and do all types of changes and that sort of thing. And it'll make it feel really nice. All right. And so I just wanted to set this up so that we can start thinking about what's it's going to look like from the player's perspective. And this is really going to come into play when we start kind of building out levels and kind of getting the levels kind of designed out in different areas. Maybe we will use a fixed camera for certain rooms that we may go in or things like that. So it's going to be really useful. So that's pretty much it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to introduce you guys to another asset, and that's going to be called UModeler. Because what I want to do now is start thinking about level design and start planning some things out. Because the goal here for the next few videos is going to be creating the player death. And with the player death, that's going to evolve multiple things. We're going to have a player spawn point. We're going to have an attribute for different lives, and we're going to even have a level checkpoint. So what I want to do is kind of build out a very simple base level within this scene. So we're not going to actually change this scene, but just a base level where you're going to move from point A to point B, hit a checkpoint. In between those points, of course, you may be able to die. And we want to make sure that all of those things are working. So with that said, in the next video, I'm going to talk about UModeler just a little bit, and then we're going to use that. Now, that's not to say you can't use ProBuilder to build it up. They're very similar, but I would like to start using UModeler because I kind of like certain tools that it has. So we can talk about that in the next video. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. To stay up to date on the latest 3D platforming tutorial, feel free to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support, you can find me on Patreon, or of course you can hit me up on Discord. I like to talk about whatever project you guys are working on. Of course, thanks for hanging with me. Your support is always appreciated. As always, remember, never give up and keep moving forward. Peace.